Welcome to the first mid-month video teaching that we'll be offering for the Marga program for 2019. Each month, I or Camille or Lopon Liz will post one of these teachings on the text that we're reading during that month. Now, actually, technically in February, there were no assigned readings, but there was one in January, and we didn't have a mid-month teaching then. That was when the retreat took place. And the assigned text for them was the first 3 chapters of As It Is, Volume 2, which is absolutely one of my favorite books ever. The idea of adding even one word of my commentary to it is daunting, but that can't stop me because I have to say something and I could gush about it endlessly. And this book we will be continuing to read through the year, and it's really a book that you can continue to read for the rest of your life. It's not so much following the month-by-month practices, but it's presenting the overall view of these practices in a brilliant, fresh, living way. Toku Urgyen, who is these talks are taken from, was a renowned Dzogchen master. He died in 1996. As many of you might know or not, he's the father of Sokding Rinpoche and Choki Nyima Rinpoche and Mingyur Rinpoche, who are all teachers. They're very active with Western and Asian students. Sokding Rinpoche has come to Wonderwell and taught a couple of times. He's a heart teacher to many of us in his Sangha. Some people have actually met Toku Urgyen. I did not, though I feel I've met him through his words. One of the things that makes this book so alive and fresh is that it is taken from his actual in-person teachings. So it was transcribed and translated brilliantly by Eric Pema Kunzong, and his wife Marcia Schmidt, and that team at Rangjung Yeshe Press who just offer these treasures to the world. And he was often the translator on the spot with Rinpoche. These teachings, these particular talks that they transcribed and edited for this book were given in 1994, 1995, which is just a couple years before he died. So you could see these as not his deathbed teachings, but the most precious teachings he could possibly offer, which he was always given. He was renowned by those who met him, and I've heard this secondhand, for being someone who was very generous in giving the so-called pointing out instructions into the nature of mind to anyone who came to him. His students, Westerners came, people from all over. He had an ability to evoke that, as do many of our teachers. I personally find that to be something that Lama Will has a great gift for, though she might be modest about that. And really, what we're pointing to is this nature of mind that is at the heart of all beings, including ourselves, and that we can evoke in each other, that we can connect with in each other. But Toku Urgyen was very gifted in doing that, and he talks about that right in the beginning of the chapter, first chapter, about the pointing out instructions from a qualified master, how important that is to be introduced to, as it were, one's mind essence, the essence of one's nature, this empty essence suffused with cognizance, as he says over and over again. Empty, spacious, not limited or constricted by form, yet not just vacant like a vacuum. It's inseparable from a knowing awareness. That's our essential nature. And I'll be reading some quotes from this book that he uses to express that view. So that's, and traditionally one might request a pointing out instruction from a teacher to do something like that, to introduce oneself. But these can also happen in many other ways, just by being in the presence of a great teacher who's abiding in their nature of mind more transparently, that can evoke like a tuning fork evokes the same the sound within us, or the sound of the gong, which we can resonate with, finding the inner gong, as it were. So I would invite you to read this book as a source of transmission, not as something to study as one might study another text. It has brilliant, succinct descriptions of the view and how that fits in with many aspects of Buddha Dharma. He's brilliant at doing so. And that's helpful in informing our understanding of the Dharma. But one of the special gifts of this book is the fact that I find, and many have found, that it can just evoke this recognition within us, a direct experience of it. I remember not long after this book was first published in 2000, in the next year, early 2001, I and three of my Dharma friends traveled from the Boston area to Ithaca, New York, to attend a weekend of teachings by Lama Palden. She's one of the first Western women lamas in Tibetan Buddhism. Brilliant teacher. She still teaches out in the Bay Area. She's a psychotherapist as well, so she's very psychologically informed. She was giving a teaching on Tolopa's famous instruction to his disciple Naropa, the so-called Ganges meditation, because he gave it to him on the banks of the Ganges River 1,500 years ago, whenever it was. A very famous text. In fact, Tolkien Urgyen quotes from it in, I think, the third chapter, when he Tolopa tells Naropa, it is not it is not the perceived that binds us, it is our clinging that binds us. So it's not the things of the world that bind us to suffering and to attachment. It is clinging. So cut your clinging. That was one of the essential instructions in the Ganges meditation. In any case, we went to this teaching, and at one point, Lama Palden was talking about Dharma books, and she said, some Dharma books I find are just direct transmissions to read them. They're not text to study so much as direct transmissions. And she added, for me, the books of Tolkien Urgyen do that. And I certainly feel the same way, so I was delighted to hear that I wasn't the only one. And so I invite you to experience this book, not just study it, but to experience it. And it may be any passage in the book. I was just rereading this several times. I've read it many times, but I was rereading it several times before this teaching. It just blows me away anew how beautiful and brilliant and direct and fresh it is. It's one of those books, if I were to start to highlight the passages that really do it for me, I'd be highlighting the whole book, practically. So I have abstained from highlighting. I have only in sticky notes in that book. But I want to touch on several of the main points in the book that I think are well worth keeping in mind. I think the book itself is very clear and lucid, and I don't think it needs a lot of commentary necessarily. But that being said, I'm going to offer some. One thing I would encourage, just as a caveat, and this may not be needed by you in particular, is to not get caught up in some of the particular traditional Tibetan Buddhist cultural frames and references that may come up. If those things, if you think, I don't know if I believe in that, I wouldn't worry about it. For example, I wrote down a few of the things that you could come up on. You said, every being has been our mother. Now that's a belief in rebirth that goes way, way back, so that all beings would have churned through the ocean of samsara and be reborn, and in one life we're the mother to someone and they're the mother to us. Doesn't mean you have to believe it literally. He refers to the 18 hell realms if you really fall into negative karma. You don't have to decide whether you believe in hell realms literally. They refer to like the methods of birth, and there's some sort of spontaneous birth and birth from moisture. or the 5 elements, which I think are a very useful way of looking at things. But of course, maybe we have a different scientific understanding of the construct of nature. But again, the 5 elements can be beautiful metaphorically and also as a way of understanding principles. Or talking about miracles. He talks about people who truly realized, being able to walk through rock or put their handprint in rock and so on. You can keep an open mind, or you can say, I don't believe in that. But that's not the point here. The point is, and he says as much too, that there are people who have powers to read minds and so on. He said, that's not a true accomplishment. A true accomplishment is being able to be resting in a nature of mind and to have a compassionate heart and to be of service to others and to help them connect with their ultimate nature. So just want to have that as a caveat. With that exception, I think everything in this book is self-explanatory in a sense. It's so clear. But again, I do want to comment on some things here. And that direct experience is so important. He keeps pointing back to that. There's some wonderful passages, not in these first 3 chapters, but going on, that you'll see there'll be an italicized section where a student asks a question, and sometimes the question's there. Later on, there'll even be something little in parentheses where they'll say, Rinpoche remains in Rigpa as direct transmission, then continues to speak. Or once again, Rinpoche gives direct pointing out by example of remaining in Rigpa. That's kind of incredible. It gives me shivers just thinking about that. Someone's writing this down. Here's this moment of people experiencing awakening. So that can happen throughout in this book, and I invite you to just be present as you read this book. It's well worth it reading it chapter by chapter because it builds on itself. But he comes back again and again, returns again and again to the same points. They may seem familiar, but hopefully they're always fresh. After all, as he points out, the way to be enlightened is to train in recognizing mind essence and become stable in this recognition. Now, if you recall, the first several teachings by Lopan Liz in this winter's retreat, which if you attended live, or you live streamed, or you can listen to them on videos, she's presenting the same frame about view and meditation and then conduct, or ground, path, and fruit, which are parallel. Those 3 parallel each other. The view being this recognition of our empty, awake nature, which might be just a glimpse. It's very brief. As he says, our practical experience of it may last only a few seconds. If the moment of recognition lasts only a short time, we need to repeat it many times. Remember that quote I had earlier from him, which was quoting from another great master, short moments many times. Short moments of recognizing many times. That's what he keeps encouraging us to do. So in these chapters, he's describing the experience of this view. It may last briefly, but it's kind of timeless when it happens. And then he's also encouraging you to revisit it again and again. But again, it's not really a meditation. In other words, to revisit it, you can't make it happen. As he said, there's not a dust mote of anything to meditate on. The supreme meditation is to not meditate. So those moments are moments of reconnecting, and there may be a certain intentionality to reconnect, but then we just let it have its lifetime, as long as it, the half-life of a radioactive particle, until it vanishes, and then we revisit it. For example, he uses one analogy. It's a way of reminding. There's no other way for a beginner to recognize. It is like the electric light here in my room. We need to flip the switch for the light to come on. Would the light come on by itself otherwise? The act of flipping the switch is the same as mindfulness or re-mindfulness, reconnecting with this empty essence. In the very moment of recognizing, you arrive at unconfined, empty cognizance without having to do anything further than that. That suffices, the re-recognizing. And it's because it's so intangible, it can seem a little elusive. But, as he says, it's so much already a part of who we really are. I love this passage on page 68. 66. Right now, it is not morning or afternoon, but noon. At this time of day, you cannot really separate the empty space from the sunlight. So this image for complete enlightenment is the indivisibility of space and daylight. Remember, empty essence and this cognizant awake quality, this nature, this awareness, this knowing quality. Spacious and open and utterly aware. Sentient beings are no farther away from being Buddhas, than this shaded area is from being sunlit, and he must have been pointing out. We're no farther away than the shaded area of this room where he's speaking to the sunlit part of the room. It is very close. It is only a matter of recognizing or not recognizing. Now, this book is just filled with that. Just hearing that phrase, it is very close. That could be all you need to hear. That might be the phrase. So I encourage you also in this book to pause when moments like that of inspiration arrive, of connection arrive through what he's saying. He just does this again and again. For instance, let's look at page 75. And here he's talking about why it's not enough to understand this with the thinking mind. It needs to be directly experienced. A thought construct of emptiness is not useful. We need the natural emptiness. The moment you recognize mind essence, it is already seen. Isn't that quite easy? If the Buddha had said that there was something to see and you somehow miss it, you would be in trouble. But there is no thing to see. It is emptiness. This is what we need to see. When seeing that, nothing is missing. Nothing is left out that you still haven't seen. In the moment of recognizing the essence, there is no thought. It is free. It is not an entity that slowly comes into you like being possessed by a spirit. In the very moment of recognizing, in that same instant, the empty essence is seen. By merely seeing the empty essence, no thought remains. It is liberated, free. This is quite easy, isn't it? It's easy for you to say. But that's so reassuring. There's nothing you need to make up, nothing you need to accomplish, nothing you need to imagine. Isn't that wonderfully simple and easy? Seeing no thing is the supreme sight. So, I'm sorry, my heart just warms to hear him say things like this. And I'll admit myself too, I can read this sometimes and it will still seem far away. But there's something about the warmth of his words that makes it seem doable and intimate and known. It's as if he has confidence, not in his own recognition of this, but in the fact that it's true for you too. You may recall in one of the days that I taught at the winter retreat, it was on the day we were talking about devotion, I read a passage from Sonya Rinpoche, Toko Urgyen's son, from his book, Open Heart, Open Mind, when he describes his first pointing out from his father. And it was a beautiful passage. It's called First Glimpse, and I think it's around page 200 or something in that book by Sonny Rinpoche. And he describes that beautiful moment when Tolkien is introducing him to nature of mind. Remember him saying, don't block anything, senses wide open. So he talks about that here. Complete openness. There is no need to block experience. Simply avoid fixating on the experience and labeling it. This complete openness, all the senses wide open, called Zongtal in Tibetan, means not attached to anything, not fixating on anything. Your five senses, we need to grow used to this type of openness. Your five senses are wide open, wide awake, and yet thought-free. Remain in that state, utterly open. This openness is like a window pane of clear glass. It doesn't obstruct the view of anything from outside. It is totally transparent. This transparency is the same as not holding on to anything, not fixating on anything. An openness that has no division between outside and inside. So, you may remember from reading this, or if you haven't read it, chapter 3 called The Iron Rod Technique, in which he goes on about, in a delightful way, joking about if you wanted to stop your mind from thinking, you could just bang yourself on the head with an iron rod and knock yourself unconscious. And that's not the point. That would be, as he said, the pointing out of stupidity. So we're not trying to eliminate experience. It's all about not getting caught up in it. Even, now they often talk about thoughts dissolving, thought-free, and so on, and that can lead us to think if we have any thoughts occurring, then we're not meditating enough. The point is not getting involved in them. Sonny Rinpoche had a wonderful teaching when he came to Wonderwell, and I think I shared this at the winter retreat, which he clarified that. He was saying, if you're resting in openness, you're open to everything. Let's say a bird song comes up. You hear the bird song. And let's say, hearing the bird song, the thought bird also arises. That alone is not a problem. That's as spontaneous. That's like the sixth sense of thinking. The five senses are open. You're not blocking the thinking process. You're just not getting sucked into it and identifying with it. So the thought, hear the bird song. You think bird, that's okay. Then if you go down the slippery slope, what kind of bird is it? I like that bird. I'd like to go out and see that bird. Then you're off to the races of conceptual thinking. So this is about the meditation or the non-meditation, resting in the view of just the empty essence of our true nature, the view. So there are other meditations that might be more formful and intentional, utilizing the conceptual mind. And we will be exploring those in the shamatha practice, for example, where we're intentionally resting the mind on an object and then just resting the mind. And there's a quality in which we're bringing the mind back, or remembering to allow the mind to be drawn back to the object. But within that, we're doing it in the same spirit as the view of not getting caught up in anything, being open to everything. So remember, we're not concentrating on an object in shamatha to block out everything. We're just letting that be a kind of anchor to present awareness, which is really connecting us with this awareness of openness. So within that resting the mind with an object, thoughts and also perception, sounds, sights, and so on can be happening, but we're not getting caught up in them. We're allowing this anchor to be there so that it brings us back, draws us back. But ultimately, that's in the same spirit of being wide open and also not drawn into anything. But shamatha can help give us a steadiness in which that becomes more possible. there's also, as he said, there's no need to hold on to being the experiencer of a particular experience. The moment you leave everything wide open, free from clinging and fixation, you discover the concepts of perceiver and perceived naturally subside. So we're not at war with the sense of self. We sometimes think we have to somehow conquer duality and arrive in non-duality, non-separation. Just resting in openness solves, as he said, this is the knowing one that frees all, knowing the one essential point that frees all the other constrictions and attachments and so on. And this idea, so first we want to recognize, and many of these passages in this book are so evocative of that experience of the view, that those alone, just reading those, could help connect you with that. Let's see, I want to find one that I particularly love. One about space. He just describes it in such a natural way. Ah, yes, page 44. He describes space as an analogy. Space, mind is empty. Space is also empty. No matter where you go in space, there's no limit, no boundary, no edge. If you were to travel in a spaceship in a single direction for 100 billion years, you would not reach the end of space. Even if you could go all the way through the earth and come out the other side, you would not find the bottom of space. And were you to travel another 100 billion years, you still won't find the bottom anywhere. You can travel forever, and you'll never reach a place where space ends. Now, how can something without limits have a center? It can't, can it? That is why it is taught that space has no center and no edge. The Buddha used space to point out how mind is. He said that mind is empty like space, that just as space has no limits in any direction, mind has no limit, center or edge. As a matter of fact, wherever there is space, mind is present, meaning awareness. I don't know, when I read that last night, it did it for me. It connected to that sense of infinite spaciousness within, which is already there. That's why it's so, as he said, so easy, isn't it? Because it's already there. It's so close. He also said something beautiful, that once we get connected with this, as I said, it's reconnecting. It's the practice is just recognizing and then just resting and not doing anything. And he said, recognize your mind, and in the absence of any concrete thing, rest loosely. After a while, we again get caught up in thoughts. But by recognizing again and again, we grow more and more used to the natural state. We often talk about getting used to it as actually the meditation in this practice of Dzogchen Mudra, natural meditation. The view, the glimpse being introduced, and then the meditation is the getting used to it, which we'll do for the rest of our lives, and who knows how long. It's a delightful getting used to. We get distracted, we get caught up in things, and we go, oh, it's still here again. He says, very beautiful. It's like learning something by heart. After a while, you don't need to think about it. I love that analogy, learning something by heart. And he comes back to that later. He says it's like Om Mani Padme Hum. Do you need to think about, you've memorized it by heart already, or it could be your favorite poem, or your favorite pith instruction, which are so plentiful in this book. You might have a little attention like, oh yeah, Om Mani Padme Hum. But you already know it, so you're just revisiting it. And so too with this natural state, you know it by heart. And actually knowing by heart is more accurate than, say, knowing it by the conceptual thinking mind. So I love that way he puts it into perspective, and invites us to just reconnect through the heart, which also leads his second chapter there, which is on blessings. He covers a lot of territory in all these chapters, but that's where we have that beautiful quote that he quotes from, I think, the third Karmapa, in the moment of love, our empty essence nakedly dawns. I quoted that on the winter retreat, and in the context of compassion practice and how important compassion is for awakening. And he makes that point here about the importance of compassion in two ways. One, he said, true accomplishment is not through, as he said, miraculous powers. A truly accomplished practitioner is someone who demonstrates compassion and devotion. Compassion for all beings who are caught in suffering like ourselves, who get distracted, who lose sight of their own true nature, maybe aren't consciously connected with it. Naturally feel compassion for them. And devotion for those who have inspired it in us. And how powerful the practices of compassion can be in helping us to open our hearts and our minds and let go of the clinging that can keep us cut off from this free, open Zangtas, vast openness. And if it's open, how can it not be open to all? So that's that open-heartedness again. So I think that may be a point of just saying there's also the whole tradition of lineage throughout this. He's quoting the third Karmapa who lived centuries ago. He's quoting Tilopa saying, it's not the things of this world that bind us. Naropa is clinging, so cut your clinging. That is one teacher to one student kindly offering him his hard advice to access his freedom. That's been passed down teacher to student throughout the centuries, and now we're getting it from our teachers. And then Toko Urgyen, his lineage is both in the Mahamudra through the Tilopa and Naropa, which is the Mahamudra lineage that we're following here, and he's also a teacher in the Dzogchen lineage, Dzogchen master. So he quotes Longchenpa and Guru Rinpoche as well. And as you know, Lama Willa has gotten teachings in both. Her training was as a Kagyu Lama, but she's also had Dzogchen transmissions and teachings too. And there was a whole non-sectarian Rimei lineage that evolved in the 19th century and the 20th century, bringing together the various streams. So they would, all these masters would be transmitting their teachings to each other so that they could keep alive the practice tradition. And we're the beneficiaries of that. We're so fortunate. So this is being transmitted to us down through the centuries, and that's good to remember that this isn't just a one-off experience that we're trying to catch on to, that many have caught on in the past too, and many have struggled. All the stories of the master, Naropa, who became this enormous luminary, and he was a tremendous scholar at the time, he struggled with his teacher, the teacher trying to point out the way, just as Toko Urgyen is trying to kindly point out the way for us. So remembering that kindness, we could talk about the unrepayable kindness of the teachers who point out what is so precious to us. And of course, as I said, they're not giving us something that isn't already within. The pointing out, that phrase indicates that, it points out that it's a pointing out to what's already within you. It can seem to come from or be evoked by, again, the transmission, but it's really within us all along. And again, at the winter retreat, the last day, I talked about the 4 kinds of gurus in one way of looking at it. And there was the guru as the living teacher, someone like the Buddha himself, or any other teacher that we have in our life. Toko Urgyen is a great living example, now no longer living, but living forever through his teachings and his impact on others. And there's the teaching of the text or the Dharma as guru, and this is a prime example. This book is a prime example where directly just reading the book can be awakening. And then there's, I mentioned, the guru of symbolic appearance, often what arises in nature can be a kind of direct transmission. and then the ultimate guru, which is the nature of all things, and also the inner guru, which is one with the inner guru in us, that also can be a teacher. That's why we can have spontaneous experiences anytime. And it's why we can resonate like a tuning fork to a tuning fork, with a great master who's resting in that. It's like it awakens it in us, because it's already there, our true nature. So then again, this is all about natural meditation. In the scheme of things, it was we too were introduced to that at the beginning of this Marga year. Lopam Liz extensively spent time, and I encourage you to go back to those teachings if you haven't listened to them. They frame the entire arc of the year. They frame actually all the path of awakening. We'll be leading up to exploring that total openness sequentially through practices throughout the year, but culminating in the last practices, latter part of the year. But as we've emphasized already, there's that moment of openness in every practice. We begin with the 3 letting bees, or just openness, and this is what Tolga Urgen is talking about in this book. That's the time to just rest in openness. And again, at the end of practice, if we're doing shamatha practice, when we release the mind's resting with an object, we let everything dissolve and we rest in openness. This is it. Zangta, openness, rigpa, nature of mind, all of this. That's our opportunity. Whether we're accessing it in a full-blown way, we don't need to judge that. We just do the best we can. We let go and let be. So that's what he's describing. And and we also are doing practices, as I said, that are a little more intentional and conceptual and formful. When we hold the benefactors in mind, or when we're working with shamatha, when we're resting the mind on an object. So that leads to a very important part of this book, and that's at the very end of the 3rd chapter, the Ayn Rand technique. And he talks about, as we did on the winter retreat, about relative and ultimate practice. Ultimate practice being this practice of non-meditation, the meditation of non-meditation, of just resting in openness. You can't really do anything once you're in. If you do anything while you're in it, you're already turning into a contrived meditation, which happens, and then we notice and we let go if we can. And then there are all the relative practices, so-called relative practices, where we're bringing benefactors to mind and receiving their blessings and letting go, letting ourselves be radiated by that, extending love to others, as we've done in previous Marga years. So if you do that practice, the relative practice of shamatha, there's no end of relative practice. Both are important, and he emphasizes that in this book too, that this does not mean that you don't need relative practice. And the other key point that's related to this is that when you hear things about just being open to all, not rejecting or accepting anything, not clinging for anything, not pushing anything away, just resting in openness, not judging anything. That language comes up a lot when we're resting in the view. But he makes it clear that we don't misconstrue that to mean that advice is then given to us in our everyday activities or in our Dharma practice. It doesn't mean we don't care about our Dharma practice. As he said, come to this page here, in order to become a spiritual practitioner, one surely needs to accept and reject. And that is based on hope and fear. You need to apply the Dharma. It's impossible to practice the Dharma in one's life without hope and fear, without accepting and rejecting. You're rejecting unwholesome, unhelpful habits, and so on. And you're accepting the gift of the Dharma and taking it up in your life. That's in the relative thing. We're in this relative world, as to the extent that we think that we're a separate being, and there's an aspect in which we're, a manifest, incarnate being. We act in certain ways and we choose certain actions, and so those have repercussions. So we don't want to neglect that adherence to care and compassion and respect to others and wise discernment in our activities. But we don't want to, so that's where the relative is important. But we don't want to do that so much that when we're trying to rest in the view, and even trying is too hard, that we start rejecting and so on there, because then we're tangling that up in the relative. As he said, do not lose the view in the conduct. He's quoting Guru Rinpoche. If you lose the view in the conduct, you will never have the chance to be liberated. That means losing the view in the conduct being respect for cause and effect, respect for positive and negative actions, compassionate activity. But if you get totally tangled up in that and the view is lost in that, then you can't be liberated because you're still you're scheming to get this and that and reach this goal and so on, and you just can't reach the goal's goal. And do not lose the conduct in the view. If you lose the conduct in the view, you stray into black diffusion. So how I take that advice is you don't nihilistically just say, well, I'm free from hope and fear, nothing really matters. It's ultimately beyond labeling, duality, and therefore it doesn't matter how I act in my life. That's misconstruing the view and applying it to the relative activity. And then he quotes Guru Rinpoche, though the view should be as vast as the sky, keep your conduct as fine as a barley flour, which is very finely ground, and it's something Tibetans eat all the time, mixed with their butter tea. But so maybe we could come up with some other analogy for a Western audience. But the view is as vast as the sky, yet his conduct with respect to cause and effect, to the value of positive, compassionate action, is as fine as barley flour, with great attendance to details, and yet not being separate from the vast view in which everything arises and comes and goes freely. So that's a very important consideration. So don't do all the other advice is all about evoking the view, but not losing sight of our other concerns in life. I'm sure you wouldn't do that anyway, because we're, sincere, discerning, caring people. I think I'm almost. You could talk about this book, or just read this book forever, and I really encourage you treasure this book. I think it was only available as an e-book. But it is supposed to be reprinted, I think sometime this year. So if you really like it, now maybe for you, ebooks are fine. You might want to actually get the hardbound, or paperback copy so that you can have it on your shelf and just open it. I love doing book divinations with books like this. Open it at random, and chances are there's a pretty powerful pith instruction. And I assume you remember when we talked about pith instructions being little phrases that encapsulate a teaching and also often transmit a direct experience of it. And it could be different ones for different people that strike at the heart. Some of them are italicized here, the ones that he's quoting from great masters in the past. But I just looked at it. The first sentence of every paragraph seems to be like one of those pith instructions that you could put on a bumper sticker, you could put it on your car, you could engrave it in your heart, you could tattoo it if that's what you were given to, or maybe just learn it by heart, as he reminds us. So I think my commentary on this has been kind of around and around and around, which is how the book is. He keeps coming back to the view. Just want to make sure I don't leave out any of my especially favorite passages, but as I said, I could really highlight the entire book. Yeah. So, yes, please read this book as a transmission, as a gift. And all the people that went into creating this book, and Toko Urgyen himself, he's now with us. And because I started on the idea of reading this book as a transmission, and I mentioned traveling to see Lama Palden, who spoke about books like this being a transmission by him, I'll just mention, to end with a story. On that drive to see Lama Palden, which was in February of 2001, I was with my 3 other friends, and we're driving out the Mass Pike. And being a lover of things of nature, especially eagles, I've often loved particularly, I thought, hey, why don't we get off the pike and just drive into the Quabbin Reservoir? There's like a outlook there, and people have these spotting scopes, and you can see bald eagles. And of course, it was absurd. We had a 10-hour drive, and people were saying, no, we're not going to do that. So I thought, okay, it would have been nice to see an eagle. So then we're going along the pike, and we're heading towards the Connecticut River, where it goes over the Connecticut River. And I'm telling them this story because I just read an account of a particular teacher who was teaching at Samye Chimpu, which is where Guru Rinpoche's first monastery in central Tibet. And Along Chempa, who's an enormous figure in our lineage, the Dzogchen lineage, and Toko Urgyen quotes from him. Along Chempa, famously, remember lineage? Teacher to student, directly. Well, when the lineage gets along Chempa, it leaps 400 years for many of the teachings to Jigme Lingpa, who lived 400 years later, but who went into meditation at one of the caves in Samye Chimpu, and had this direct experience, this vision of Longchenpa giving him teachings. And so the lineage goes directly from Longchenpa for some of these teachings to Jigme Lingpa, who then transmitted them. His throat chakra opened, and he just started teaching this stuff. So I had just read about this. I'd heard about it before, but I'd read about it freshly, and I was telling my friends, I was sitting in the shotgun seat next to the driver, and I'm turning around, I'm saying, so he went there and had this vision, and even though it was 400 years apart, it was a direct transmission. And as I said that, I was turning to the person in front. I was talking to people in the back. I said, so even though it was 400 years apart from Longchenpa to Jigme Lingpa, it was a direct transmission. I turned to the front, and just then we're going across the Connecticut River. The exact moment I say direct transmission, a bald eagle flies right in front of our car. I mean, like 3 feet from our windshield. We're going 70 miles an hour. Just like that. So I said, holy, that's a bald eagle. So that's a direct transmission. And things like that can happen. And direct transmissions can come like that when we least expect it. And this book, that may happen for you with this book, or out in your life, where this book may prime you for being receptive to those kinds of moments of direct transmission. The transmission really from one's heart. So I would invite you to let this book's wisdom and its direct transmission evoke a spirit of receptivity to such openness in your own experience throughout this Marga year. This will always be relevant, even though it was officially, these 3 chapters were the January assigned reading. And we'll read more chapters in this book as the year progresses. But it's a very precious book, very precious. So I feel really grateful to you for taking up this practice, for being in the Marga program. It prompted me to reread this book again, which is such a precious gift. Um, and I wish you well in exploring what Tolkien again says. The very first chapter title is "It's Your Inheritance," and he's reminding you that that's always present. It's who you really are, and we can always return to that again and again and again. Something we learn by heart. May you be well, and may all beings awaken to their true nature. And may we all together awaken on the spiritual path together. Thank you.